The story of Abraham's call is a narrative of unwavering faith, obedience, and the beginning of the fulfillment of God's promises. Through Abraham, God established a chosen people, promised a land and a lineage that would bring blessings to all nations. This story not only shapes the identity of the people of Israel, but also lays the foundation for Christian and Islamic theology, where Abraham is seen as a model of faith and obedience to God. Abraham, one of the most iconic figures in the Bible, starts in a context of profound theological and historical significance. Originally named Abram, he was a man from Ur of the Chaldeans, an ancient city located in what is now southern Iraq. The narrative of his call is recorded in the book of Genesis, specifically in chapters 11 and 12, marking the beginning of a new era in the history of God's people. Abram lived in a society that practiced idolatry and worshipped multiple gods. The city of Ur was a prosperous and culturally advanced center, known for its ziggurat and the worship of the moon god, Nana. God's call to Abram is described in Genesis chapter 12, verse 1, where the Lord says to him, "Leave your country, your people and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." These words inaugurate a new phase in God's relationship with humanity. This call to Abram involves three main elements: a command to leave everything familiar, a promise of blessing and greatness, and the mission to be a blessing to all the nations of the earth. This required great faith and absolute obedience, as Abram had to leave his homeland and the security of his family without knowing exactly where he was going. Abram's response is a supreme example of faith. In Genesis 12, verse 4, it is said that Abram went as the Lord had told him. This act of immediate and unquestioning obedience is a testament to Abram's trust in God. He departed with his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, and all their possessions and servants, heading for Canaan, the land promised by God. Abram's journey through Canaan, as narrated in Genesis, is marked by a series of significant events that demonstrate his faith and obedience to God. When Abram arrived in Canaan after receiving God's call, he traveled through the land, passing places like Shechem and Bethel. In each location, Abram built altars to the Lord and invoked his name, thereby establishing a testimony of his faith in the one true God in a land dominated by idolatrous practices. Despite his faith, Abram faced significant challenges in Canaan. The most notable was a severe famine that struck the land, making it difficult for him and his family to stay there. The famine forced Abram to seek sustenance in Egypt, a land known for its wealth and abundant resources. Upon arriving in Egypt, Abram, fearing that the Egyptians would kill him to take his beautiful wife Sarai, asked her to say she was his sister. This lie led Pharaoh to take Sarai into his palace, resulting in God inflicting plagues on Pharaoh and his household. When Pharaoh discovered Sarai's true identity, he confronted Abram, returned his wife to him, and sent them away with many goods. This experience served as a test of faith for Abram and exemplified God's providence, which intervened to protect Sarai and Abram despite their imperfections and fears. The journey to Egypt was an important chapter in Abram's life, highlighting the complexity of his faith journey and God's continued faithfulness. After returning from Egypt, Abram, along with his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, and all their possessions and servants, went back to Canaan, settling between Bethel and Ai. There, Abram and Lot's prosperity became evident, as both had large flocks and many possessions. However, their abundance began to create problems. The land could not support both their flocks together, and disputes arose between Abram's and Lot's herdsmen. Internal conflicts and disputes over pastures and resources threatened family harmony and the peace necessary to live together. Abram, realizing that cohabitation was becoming unsustainable, took the initiative to resolve the situation peacefully and fairly. The separation of Abram and Lot, narrated in Genesis 13, is a significant episode that illustrates both the material wealth accumulated by the two men and the need to resolve family conflicts with wisdom and generosity. In a gesture of magnanimity, Abram proposed a solution to Lot. In Genesis chapter 13, verses 8 and 9, he says, "Let there be no strife between you and me, and between your herdsmen and my herdsmen, for we are kinsmen. Is not the whole land before you? Separate yourself from me. If you go to the left, I will go to the right, or if you go to the right, I will go to the left." This proposal not only demonstrated Abram's willingness to maintain peace, but also his trust in God to bless him regardless of where he went. Lot, looking around, saw that the whole plain of the Jordan was well-watered and fertile, comparable to the garden of the Lord and the land of Egypt. He chose this prosperous region for himself and settled in the cities of the plain, pitching his tents as far as Sodom. Abram, on the other hand, remained in Canaan, in the less attractive region. But God renewed his promises to him, assuring that all the land Abram could see would be given to him and his descendants forever. God said to Abram, "Lift up your eyes from where you are and look north and south, east and west. All the land that you see I will give to you and your offspring forever." After the separation, Abram moved to the vicinity of the great trees of Mamre at Hebron, where he built another altar to the Lord, continuing to express his devotion and faith. Despite the distance, Abram did not cease to care for Lot. Shortly afterward, the rescue of Lot, recorded in Genesis 14, is an episode of courage and determination in Abram's life. Lot had settled in Sodom, a city in the plain of the Jordan. During this time, a coalition of 4 kings, led by Chedorlaomer of Elam, attacked and defeated the cities of the plain, including Sodom and Gomorrah, capturing their inhabitants and looting their possessions. Lot was taken prisoner along with the other residents of Sodom. When Abram learned of Lot's fate, he immediately acted to rescue his nephew. He gathered 318 trained men from his household, and with a small force of allies, pursued the invaders to the region of Dan. In a daring nighttime operation, Abram divided his group and attacked the enemies, successfully defeating them and recovering all the looted goods. Additionally, Abram rescued Lot and all the other captives. After the victory, Abram returned with the recovered goods and freed prisoners. He was met by the king of Sodom, who offered him a reward. However, Abram refused, stating that he did not want anyone to say that he had become rich at the expense of the king of Sodom. Furthermore, Abram met Melchizedek, king of Salem and priest of God Most High, who blessed Abram and to whom Abram gave 1/10 of everything. This episode highlights Abram's courage, family loyalty, and integrity, reinforcing his reputation as a man of faith and action. In Genesis 15, God establishes a crucial covenant with Abram. Abram expresses concern about not having an heir, fearing that his servant Eliezer of Damascus would inherit his wealth. God then reiterates his promise that Abram will have a biological son and descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky. To seal this promise, God performs a covenant ritual. He instructs Abram to sacrifice some animals and lay the pieces in 2 rows. At dusk, God, in the form of a smoking firepot and a blazing torch, passes between the pieces, symbolizing the seriousness of the covenant and guaranteeing Abram that his descendants will inherit the land of Canaan. Soon after, the Bible narrates one of the most frequently mentioned and preached stories in churches. Sarai's impatience with the promise of a son leads her to offer her Egyptian servant Hagar to Abram so that he could have a child through her. Hagar conceives and subsequently despises Sarai, resulting in conflict between the two. Sarai treats Hagar harshly, and Hagar flees to the desert. There, an angel of the Lord finds her and instructs her to return and submit to Sarai, promising that her son will be the progenitor of a great nation. Hagar returns and gives birth to Ishmael, marking the birth of Abram's first son, though not the child of the promise. In Genesis 17, God appears to Abram and establishes a more detailed and formal covenant with him. On this occasion, God changes Abram's name to Abraham, meaning father of many nations, and Sarai's name to Sarah, meaning princess. God promises that Abraham will be the father of a multitude of nations and that kings will descend from him. As part of this covenant, God institutes circumcision as an everlasting sign. He commands that all males in his household, including servants and descendants, be circumcised. This practice would become a fundamental right for the people of Israel. Additionally, God promises Abraham that he and Sarah will have a son whom they will name Isaac. Even in their advanced age, God reaffirms his promise to Abraham and Sarah, ensuring that Isaac will be the heir of the covenant. Circumcision symbolizes Abraham's and his descendants' faith and obedience to God's covenant. In Genesis 18, Abraham receives a visit from 3 men who are angels of the Lord at the entrance of his tent. They confirm the promise that Sarah will bear a son, Isaac, within a year. After this visit, God reveals to Abraham his intention to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah due to their extreme wickedness. Concerned for his nephew Lot, who lives in Sodom, Abraham intercedes with God, asking if he would spare the cities if there were righteous people in them. God agrees that if he finds 10 righteous people in Sodom, he will not destroy the city. Soon, 2 angels arrive in Sodom and are received by Lot. The wickedness of the men of Sodom is confirmed when they try to assault the visitors. The angels instruct Lot to flee with his family, for the city will be destroyed. Lot, his wife, and 2 daughters flee to a nearby town, Zoar. During the escape, Lot's wife looks back and becomes a pillar of salt. God then rains sulfur and fire on Sodom and Gomorrah, completely destroying them. These events highlight divine justice, Abraham's compassionate intercession, and the severity of God's judgment on wickedness. Afterward, Abraham travels to the region of Gerar, where he encounters King Abimelech. Fearing for his life, Abraham again says that Sarah is his sister because she is very beautiful, and he fears they will kill him to take her as a wife. Abimelech, believing Sarah is unmarried, takes her into his palace. During the night, God appears to Abimelech in a dream, warning him that Sarah is Abraham's wife. God tells Abimelech he will die if he does not return Sarah to Abraham. Shocked and scared, the king confronts Abraham the next morning, asking why he lied. Abraham explains that he feared for his life. Abimelech then returns Sarah to Abraham along with gifts of sheep, cattle, and servants, and allows them to live wherever they wish in his land. Additionally, Abimelech gives Abraham 1,000 pieces of silver as compensation and to publicly show that Sarah was not dishonored. After Abraham prays, God heals Abimelech, his wife, and his female servants, allowing them to have children again. This story underscores God's protection over Abraham and Sarah and the importance of integrity. In Genesis 21, God's long-awaited promise to Abraham and Sarah is finally fulfilled. Despite her advanced age, Sarah gives birth to a son as God had promised. Abraham, who is 100 years old, names the boy Isaac, which means he laughs, reflecting both Sarah's joy and her initial incredulity at hearing God's promise. Abraham fulfills the covenant with God by circumcising Isaac when he is 8 days old. Sarah expresses her joy and gratitude, saying, "God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me." The birth of Isaac represents the fulfillment of the divine promise, renewing Abraham and Sarah's faith and marking the beginning of the lineage that would fulfill God's purposes for future generations. As Isaac grows and is weaned, Abraham holds a great feast to celebrate. However, tensions arise in Abraham's household. Sarah sees Ishmael, Hagar's son, playing and becomes concerned about his influence on Isaac. She tells Abraham, "Get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that slave woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac." Abraham is greatly distressed by this because Ishmael is also his son. But God tells Abraham in Genesis 21:12, "Do not be distressed about the boy and your slave woman. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. I will also make the son of the slave into a nation, because he is your offspring." Early the next morning, Abraham takes some food and a skin of water and gives them to Hagar, placing them on her shoulders, along with the boy, and sends them off. Hagar goes into the desert of Beersheba, and soon the water runs out. Desperate, she leaves the boy under a bush and sits a distance away, not wanting to watch him die, and she begins to sob. But God hears the boy's cry, and the angel of God calls to Hagar from heaven, saying, "What is the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation." Then God opens Hagar's eyes, and she sees a well of water. She fills the skin and gives the boy a drink. God is with Ishmael as he grows up. He lives in the desert and becomes an archer. His mother gets a wife for him from Egypt, and they live in the desert of Paran. Thus, Ishmael also becomes a great nation, fulfilling God's promise to Abraham. In Genesis 21:22, Abraham makes a peace treaty with Abimelech, king of Gerar. Abimelech, along with his army commander Phicol, goes to Abraham and says, "God is with you in everything you do. Now swear to me here before God that you will not deal falsely with me or my children or my descendants. Show to me and the country where you now reside as a foreigner the same kindness I have shown to you." Abraham agrees and says, "I swear it." However, he takes the opportunity to resolve a dispute over a well that Abimelech's servants had seized. The king asserts he knew nothing about the situation and that no one had informed him of the dispute. To seal the agreement, Abraham gives Abimelech sheep and cattle. Additionally, he sets apart 7 ewe lambs and gives them to Abimelech as a sign that Abraham himself had dug the well. Abimelech accepts the lambs, and the place is called Beersheba, which means well of the oath, because there the 2 men swore an oath. After this, Abimelech and Phicol return to the land of the Philistines. Abraham plants a tamarisk tree in Beersheba and calls on the name of the Lord, the eternal God. Thus, Abraham continues to live in the land of the Philistines for a long time, in peace with his neighbors, thanks to the covenant made with Abimelech. In Genesis 22, God decides to test Abraham's faith and obedience in a profoundly challenging way. He calls Abraham and says, "Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you." Despite the immense pain this command must have caused him, Abraham obeys without questioning. He rises early the next morning, prepares his donkey, and takes with him 2 of his servants and Isaac. They travel for 3 days until Abraham sees the mountain in the distance. He tells the servants, "Stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you." Abraham places the wood for the burnt offering on Isaac's shoulders and carries the fire and the knife himself. As they walk, Isaac, curious, asks, "Father, the fire and wood are here, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham replies with faith, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." When they reach the place God had told him about, Abraham builds an altar, arranges the wood, binds Isaac, and lays him on the altar. As he raises the knife to sacrifice his son, the angel of the Lord calls out to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham," and he replies, "Here I am." The angel says, "Do not lay a hand on the boy. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." Abraham looks up and sees a ram caught by its horns in a thicket. He takes the ram and sacrifices it as a burnt offering instead of his son. Abraham names that place, "The Lord will provide." And indeed, the Lord reaffirms his promise to Abraham, saying that because he obeyed and did not withhold his only son, he would greatly bless Abraham, making his descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore, and that all nations on earth would be blessed through them. This event not only confirms Abraham's unwavering faith, but also symbolizes God's provision and faithfulness, foreshadowing the sacrifice he would make in the future, giving his only son for the salvation of humanity. In this act, we see the essence of true faith, unconditional obedience to God, even when we do not understand his plans. Abraham believed that God would provide, and God honored that faith by providing a ram in place of Isaac. The Bible then recounts the death of Sarah, Abraham's wife, in Genesis 23. Sarah lived to be 127 years old and died in Kiriath Arba, also known as Hebron, in the land of Canaan. Abraham mourned deeply for his beloved wife and wept over her. Wishing to bury Sarah with dignity, Abraham approached the Hittites, the local inhabitants, and asked them to sell him a piece of land for a burial site. He specifically requested the cave of Machpelah, which belonged to Ephron, son of Zohar. Ephron offered to give the cave to Abraham, but Abraham insisted on paying the full price. After negotiation, Abraham purchased the cave of Machpelah and the surrounding field for 400 shekels of silver. He then buried Sarah in the cave of Machpelah, near Mamre, which is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. This act not only provided a resting place for Sarah, but also marked Abraham's first possession in the Promised Land, a symbol of God's faithfulness to his promises. In Genesis 24, Abraham, now advanced in age, is concerned about the future of his son Isaac and desires for him to marry a woman from his own family, not a Canaanite. Abraham calls his most trusted servant and asks him to go to his homeland and find a wife for Isaac. The servant, under oath, sets out for the city of Nahor in Aram Naharaim. When he arrives, he prays to God, asking for a clear sign to identify the right woman for Isaac, that she will offer water to him and to his camels. While he is still praying, Rebekah, granddaughter of Nahor, Abraham's brother, appears and does exactly that. Recognizing the sign from God, the servant gives gifts to Rebekah and explains his mission. Rebekah takes the servant to her father Bethuel's house, where he recounts the story and Abraham's request. Bethuel and Rebekah's brother Laban agree that the proposal is God's will and allow Rebekah to go with the servant. Rebekah, demonstrating faith and courage, decides to leave immediately. When she arrives in the land of Canaan, Isaac goes out into the field to meditate and sees the caravan approaching. Rebekah, upon seeing Isaac, dismounts from her camel and asks the servant who he is. Upon learning that he is Isaac, she covers herself with a veil as a sign of modesty and respect. Isaac takes Rebekah into his mother Sarah's tent and makes her his wife. He loves her deeply, and Rebekah becomes a comfort to him after his mother's death. This marriage, provided by God, continues Abraham's lineage and fulfills the divine promise. Shortly after, in Genesis 25, verses 1 through 6, following Sarah's death and Isaac's marriage, Abraham takes another wife named Keturah. With Keturah, Abraham has 6 more children: Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. These children become ancestors of various nations. Jokshan, for example, is the father of Sheba and Dedan, while Midian has sons named Ephah, Epher, Enoch, Abida, and Eldah. These new lineages spread out and settle in different regions, contributing to the fulfillment of God's promise that Abraham would be the father of many nations. Despite having these new children, Abraham makes a clear distinction regarding Isaac. He gives gifts to the sons of his concubines and sends them away to the east, ensuring that Isaac remains the sole heir of the covenant and God's promises. Thus, Abraham protects Isaac's inheritance and maintains the continuity of the line promised by God. In Genesis 25, verse 7, the Bible records Abraham's death at the age of 175. He lived a long life, blessed by God. Abraham died at a good old age in full years and was gathered to his ancestors. His sons, Isaac and Ishmael, buried him in the cave of Machpelah near Hebron, which Abraham had bought from Ephron the Hittite as a burial place for himself and his family. Thus, Abraham's earthly life came to an end. He was a man who walked with God, who listened to and obeyed his promises, even when it required sacrifice and faith beyond human understanding. Abraham was called a friend of God and is remembered as an example of unwavering faith. His journey was marked by challenges, tests of faith, and moments of greatness, but it was always guided by the faithful hand of the Lord. Abraham lived to see his promises fulfilled, with the birth of his son Isaac and the continuation of his lineage. In Abraham's death, his story did not end. His legacy of faith and trust in God continued to unfold through his descendants and influenced future generations. Abraham left a lasting example of unwavering faith, devotion, and love for God. May we learn from Abraham to trust in God's promises, even when we do not understand his plans, and to follow in faith, knowing that he is faithful to fulfill all he has promised. Like Abraham, may we be called friends of God and leave a legacy of faith for future generations.